what if the 1982 season had correct stand-ins? This and the next theory after this are probably the two most special theories in my life, as these were the very first theories I thought of all the way back in the spring and summer of 2008, working on my father's Mac laptop at the time on Wikipedia, messing around with the stands and all. And it got me thinking about those strike years of 82 and 87, all those years back in 2008, where I would mess around with the bracket and I'm getting stumped by all the tiebreakers and all, so I would stop working on it eventually. But 10 plus years later, I think it's finally time that I finally figure out these theories once and for all. This is the first one involving 1982, and next one out will be in 1987. So, let's get into this theory. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if? An NFL theory. After 2 weeks of the 1982 season, the NFL players went on strike for better player benefits and a better wage scale based upon gross revenue. The strike lasted basically 2 months, and because of this, 1982 season ended up having only 9 games played out of the 16 schedule at the time. Because of this, the NFL did a special playoff tournament where instead of at the time with being 10 teams, with each conference having 3 division winners and 2 wildcard teams, they instead went with no divisions. Everyone was in the AFC and the NFC, so there was no divisions, and the 8 best teams in that league would go into the playoffs. So it would be the biggest playoff bracket in NFL history at 16 teams, which still to this day, almost 40 years later, is still the biggest playoff bracket. Of course, right now since 1990, it's been 12 teams. The number 1 seed would host the 8, the 2 would host 7, 3 would host 6, and 4 would host 5. And had some really interesting quirks because of this schedule, including the fact that this would be the first time ever the Browns and Lions in the playoffs this year. Would be the first time ever a team with a losing record made the playoffs, and it wouldn't be until 28 years later when the Seahawks became the first team to win the division with a losing record. And another quirk would be the Cardinals, who, after they made the playoffs this year, would not make the playoffs again until 1998. So if they did not make the playoffs this year, they would have gone a 23-year gap in between the last times they made the playoffs. Yikes. And we fought the Bills just 2 years ago when they had an 18-year gap was really bad. Now this theory is not going to be about what if those 9 games were played, as we don't even know all the 9 games played, and figure out who would win. That would be pain in the ass. This is about what if the stand-ins for the regular season remained the same as they would be, instead of going to the all conferences that they had for 1982, along with going with 10 teams in the playoffs as they did back then. So, what do the stand-ins show now? Well, here's the update stands, with them being in the correct spots they were at, and the AFC, literally nothing would change whatsoever. You would still have the Raiders with the number 1 seed, the Dolphins with the number 2 seed, the Bengals still be the 3rd seed, the Steelers were the 4th seed, and the Chargers were the 5th seed. However, the NFC, oh boy, did it get changed a lot. Now, the Redskins still would have the number 1 seed. However, the Cowboys, who originally were the number 2 seed, fall all the way down to the 4th seed, as the Packers, who were originally the 3rd seed, move up to the 2nd seed. And then the Falcons, who originally had the 5th seed, move up to the 3rd seed. As I mentioned, the Cowboys fell to the 4th seed, and the Vikings, who had the 4th seed, fall to the 5th seed. So in the end, the Jets, Patriots, and Browns on the AFC side, and the Cardinals, Buccaneers, and Lions on the NFC side would miss the playoffs. This, of course, would mean we would not have a losing team in the playoffs. We have a team with a losing record in the playoffs until 2010, with the Seahawks being the first now to do so. And the Cardinals, of course, I would mention, would now have a 23-year gap in the playoffs. So, how would the playoffs happen now, as the playoffs are radically different pretty much? Well, we'll start with the wild card round. In the AFC side, the Chargers still beat the Steelers as they do in our timeline. And then in the other wild card round will be the Vikings at the Cowboys, which, funny enough, the Vikings hosted the Cowboys the final week of the season. The Vikings won that game, but this time in Arlington, and the Cowboys were like the best team in the NFC besides the Redskins, and the Vikings statistically were not a good team at all in the playoffs, I think the Cowboys would easily get this. Then we get into the divisional round, for which, if you all didn't know back then, divisional matchups were impossible in the divisional round of the playoffs. They've swapped the brackets around, so instead of the Chargers visiting the Raiders as you would expect it to be, the Chargers would instead visit the Dolphins, and the Bengals would then visit the Raiders. Same goes for the Cowboys, as they had to visit the Packers instead as the Falcons visit the Redskins. Now in the AFC side of the bracket, the Dolphins would still beat the Chargers as they did in the real-life playoffs, but then it would be the Bengals at the Raiders. These two did play in the regular season. In fact, the Bengals gave the Raiders the only loss that year, but that was in Cincinnati. This time it's in Los Angeles. Now, would it make a big difference? Well, it would probably be an offensive shootout, but the Bengals had a much better defense than the Raiders, because that Raiders defense was an Achilles heel for them last year. And seeing as much as I looked at their stats as much as I could, I think the Bengals actually could pull it off. I mean, if the Jets beat the Raiders on the road, and the Bengals were a much better team than the Jets, how could the Bengals not do it? Especially since they beat them already in the year, even if it was hosting them. So I think the Bengals would get this win this time around. And then in the NFC side, we can start off with the Falcons at the Redskins. The Falcons, just like the Vikings, were not a good team. In fact, on the NFC side, they were probably like the worst team in the playoffs. And the Redskins were just the best team in the NFC, so I don't think the Falcons would stand any chance against them. And then it would be the Cowboys at the Packers. These two actually did play each other in the playoffs in real life. However, it was at the Cowboys. And in that game, it was pretty close. Only like an 11-point difference, and the Packers did play hard, even though they did get pretty much spanked in that game. They still held on pretty much. But now in Green Bay, believe it or not, I think the Packers actually could do it. I think the Packers could pull off the upset against the Cowboys as they host them. And then it's the conference championships. Bengals at Dolphins, Packers at Redskins. Starting in the NFC side with the Packers at the Redskins. Like I said earlier, other than the Cowboys, there was pretty much no team in the NFC that could beat the Redskins, especially at home. And the Packers are no exception to this. So I think the Redskins easily would still beat the Packers. Then it's the AFC Championship, Bengals at Dolphins. As the Bengals had one of the league's best offenses against the Dolphins, who had the number 2 defense in the league. Now, these teams did not play each other in 1982 unless they had a game that was not scheduled, as they were divisional winners in 1981. However, I decided to take a look at an example as the Dolphins hosted the number 1 defense in the playoffs just the week prior, and that was the Chargers. And the Dolphins absolutely destroyed the Chargers, and they shut down that incredible offense that the Chargers had at the time. Dan Fouts threw 5 interceptions, had a QB rating of 32.5 in all. So they completely dismantled the Chargers. So if they could do that, and the Chargers were much better offense than the Bengals, why couldn't the Dolphins do that to the Bengals as well? Now the Bengals do have a better defense, which would help them out, but I don't know. I think the Dolphins probably would still get, because that defense was really good. So with that, the Super Bowl remains exactly the same. Dolphins and Redskins, and since nothing changed, it'll still be the same in real life, as the Redskins still beat the Dolphins. So with that, that'll wrap up this theory. But hey, it's just a theory, an NFL theory. Thanks for watching, as this felt so great talking about this. Now, next time out for a 1987 strike, it's going to be a very special one, as that was the actual first theory I worked on back in 2008. And oh boy, I can't wait to talk about it, as we got many more theories coming up soon for the 80s, so tune in for that. But especially the next one after the 87 one, because that one is really, really fun to talk about. So see you guys then, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about one of the very first theories I thought about when I was 15.